So welcome to your first lecture for CIS 231, Human-Computer Interaction. I'm your professor, Dr. English Dowdell. Now, before we jump into anything technical today, I wanted to start with a simple question. So I want you to think about the last time that you were frustrated with technology. Not so much confused, but frustrated. Maybe a message wasn't sent, or maybe you missed an important notification, or maybe you replied to the wrong person, or, reply to everyone. Now, I want you to keep that moment in mind. Now, this course, Human Computer Interaction, it exists because of moments like that, and those moments are incredibly common. And what's interesting is that when those moments happen, we kind of tend to blame ourselves. We'll say things like, I must be missing something, or, I'm not good with technology, or I should already know this. One of the first things that you'll learn in this course is that instinct is often wrong. That particular instinct is often wrong. In human computer interaction, we work from a different assumption. If a system is confusing, or if it's unclear, or if it's frustrating, the problem is often the design, not the user. And that idea is going to come up a lot, again and again, with this course. Now, in this course, we're not learning how to code apps, okay? We're not becoming graphic designers. Instead, it's about learning how to analyze digital experiences, how to notice design decisions, how to understand how technology shapes communication and articulate why something works and why something doesn't work. And this skill is going to apply to like workplaces, school, healthcare, social media, and everyday life. Now, one important idea I want you to take with you from day one is this: technology is never neutral. Digital tools, they don't just deliver messages, they influence, okay? They influence what we say, how we say it, when we say it, and who sees it. Now, even when we don't notice it, the design is shaping our behavior. Okay, so when we say technology is never neutral, it's because people design it and people bring values, assumptions, and constraints into what they build. Design choices determine what actions are encouraged, what behavior is discouraged, and whose needs are considered normal. Now, even something as simple as, say, a button placement or maybe a default setting can basically shape user behavior. So technology doesn't just support human activity. Remember, it actively shapes it. Now, going back to my original question, I want you to think of a digital tool that you use every day that sometimes frustrates you. So what I want you to do is take a moment. I want you to reflect on, like, what were you trying to do? Where did frustration really show up? And did you blame yourself or did you blame the system? Now, I want you to think about, like, let's say how you use video meeting tools like Zoom or Teams or Google Meets. They're supposed to make communication easier, right? But how often do they actually get in the way of that? Your audio might cut out. Sometimes people can't unmute themselves. Screen sharing will fail. 10 minutes of the meeting basically are spent, getting the technology to work. And what's interesting from an ACI perspective is that even when nothing is technically broken, we're still stressed. We're constantly checking, am I muted? Can they see me? Can they hear me? And this tells us something important. Frustration isn't always about bugs. It's about how clearly the system communicates its state to the user. Now, I use a lot of AI generated or image generators, for like I do book videos, to promote like different books. And here's what always happens to me. I know exactly, say, what image I want in my head, but getting that tool to produce it might take forever. I'll rewrite the prompt, over and over and over again. And when the image just isn't right, I don't think, oh, the system is confusing. I think, oh, I must be not writing good prompts. Now that's an HCI issue. When the system provides little feedback about how it interprets your input, users tend to blame themselves. Now, we'll revisit these examples throughout the semester of the course, but every time you feel frustrated, say, by a digital tool, I want you to stop and ask yourself, what is the interface actually asking me to do as a user? Okay, and what assumptions did the designer make about me? Now let's define what we mean by human-computer interaction without using like technical language. Now HCI, it's the study of how humans and computers communicate with each other, not just clicking buttons and typing messages and navigating screens, but how meaning is exchanged. So I want you to think of the interface, as a conversation, okay? The system is constantly talking to you through buttons, icons, menus, alerts, layouts, even silence, okay? And then you respond in this conversation by clicking and typing and waiting or even giving up, okay? Now, when conversation or communication breaks down, what we experience is confusion or frustration or hesitation or even mistakes. And those moments are central to HCI. Now, design is always communicating, even when designers don't mean to. So some examples of this is like, if you see a big button, that's going to suggest importance, right? Or if there's a hidden option, that's going to suggest, oh, don't worry about this. A warning color is going to suggest danger. If there's no feedback, that's going to suggest uncertainty. And every choice sends a signal. Design sends messages, the user interprets those messages, and then behavior changes. So let's look at some everyday examples as proof of this. Now, email and chat are both ways of sending messages, but they don't feel the same. That's not an accident. The interface teaches us how to behave. Okay, so email feels slower. There's no typing indicators. There's no expectation of immediate responses. And inbox structure encourages batching. Also, email feels more formal. Okay, we've got subject lines, longer text blocks. We've got signatures that we can include. We've got clear sender and receiver roles. And then email feels more permanent. It's easy to forward. It's easy to archive, and it feels more like a record. Okay, now if we contrast this with chat feels faster. There's typing indicators, to let us know somebody's typing. There's seen or read receipts, and there's real-time kind of back and forth going on. Chat also feels more casual. It uses shorter messages. It uses emojis, and it has more of an informal tone. And then it feels more interruptive. Notifications basically kind of pop up immediately. They're harder to kind of ignore without feeling guilty. The interface, it teaches us how urgently to respond, how formal to be, and how much effort we need to put into each message. So each of these interfaces tells us those things. It tells us, okay, if it's a chat, then maybe our response needs to be more quicker, because they can see that we got it. Okay, they see that we got the message. If we start to type, they can see sometimes that we're typing, whereas maybe with email, it doesn't feel as urgent because there's nothing really that's saying, okay, the person actually saw the email. Okay, again, that formality, it tells us how formal we need to be. In an email, we may take a little bit more time to construct our email because maybe we need to be a little bit more formal. We'll have like a greeting or something like that. Whereas chat, it's more, like just quick, quick messages. It's very short, okay, and we don't have to put a lot of effort into it. So depending on, again, that interface teaches us how to behave when we're using each one of these tools. Now, people often misuse the reply all feature. Even experienced professionals might misuse it. Instead of blaming the users, HCI asks, what does the system allow, or why, I should say, does the system allow this mistake so easily? Now, I want you to think about it. If one person makes a mistake, it might be due to user error, okay? But if thousands of people make the same mistake, then that means that's a design problem, okay? Thousands of people will accidentally do a reply all instead of just replying to the one person. So what's wrong from an HCI perspective? First of all, the reply and the reply all are often right next to each other. They're visually similar and they're equally easy to click. Okay. Now the system doesn't clearly show you who will receive the messages. It doesn't warn users, when the audience say is too large, and it doesn't slow down users, for high impact actions. So basically the system doesn't clearly communicate the consequences of the action. And that's a communication failure. That's not just like saying that you're not understanding how the system works. Now, notifications are a powerful HCI example here because users don't control all of them, and they can interrupt attention and they can carry emotional weight. Now, every time a notification appears, the system is making a decision on your behalf about what matters right now. Okay, so examples, a work message that might pop up during dinner. Okay, a meeting reminder that interrupts your focus, or maybe even a low priority alert that feels urgent because of maybe the sound or the color. Now, design choices that shape behavior might be things like sound versus silent. When it comes to these notifications, banner versus maybe a full screen, maybe even color, would shape the behavior. If it's red, it's maybe telling us that it's more urgent, or even repetition. Now, these are design decisions, not accidents. And so basically, when a system constantly interrupts us, one thing that they do is they increase cognitive load and stress, even if the message itself isn't important or urgent. Now, email, these examples that we looked at, email, chat, reply all, notifications, none of these tools really tell us how to feel or behave, but their design quietly teaches you what's urgent, what's safe, and what matters. And that's why HCI places such a strong emphasis on communication. Because when design sends, say, the wrong message, people don't fail, systems do. Again, remember, design is constantly communicating. Users are always listening, even when no one realizes it. Now, everything we've been talking about so far, frustration, confusion, workarounds, that's not random. It's exactly what human-computer interaction is concerned with. HCI asks a simple but important question. How do people actually experience the systems that they use? And one of the core ways we answer that question is through something called human-centered design. Now, human-centered design means systems should match how people naturally think and behave, not force people to constantly adapt to the technology. So when a system requires reminders, workarounds, or even repeated explanations just to do basic tasks, that's not a user problem. That's a design signal. Human-centered design treats confusion and frustration as feedback and then asks, how can the system better support the human that's using it? Okay, let's move from definition to something that you live every day, digital communication. Now, we often use the same tools socially and professionally, but the rules change. Think about it. Texting a friend versus messaging a coworker versus maybe emailing a supervisor or posting publicly. Same technology, but very different consequences. Now, why does this matter in HCI? Well, HCI is deeply concerned with context. Okay, the interface doesn't always tell us like what tone is appropriate, how visible a message is, how permanent it is. So users have to fill in the gaps, and then sometimes that's done incorrectly. Now, when we communicate, say, face to face, a lot of meaning comes from things that we don't even think about, like facial expressions, tone of voice, timing, and maybe even who else is around. Now, digital communication removes or changes many of those cues that we get, which makes communication a little bit more complicated, not simpler. When it comes to tone, there's no facial expression or body language. A message can't, like, if we send a message like, can you do this? It can sound neutral. It can sound rude, like, can you do this? It can sound urgent. It can sound even passive aggressive, depending on how the reader interprets it. And the interface matters here. Does it encourage emojis? Does it support reactions? Now, the HCI point here is when tone cues, say, are missing, or maybe even misunderstood, these misunderstandings can increase, and then users have to do extra emotional work. Okay. Now, also timing, this is another key factor that's shaped by design. Is it instant versus maybe delayed expectations? Features like read receipts, typing indicators, or last seen status, that creates social pressure. Okay, if someone sees that you've read a message but you didn't reply, the system has now created expectations, whether you agree to them or not. Okay, so that means design choices shape social norms, not just technical behavior. Also, when it comes to permanence, messages can be saved or forwarded. Face-to-face conversations, they're mostly temporary, right? But digital communication is often saved automatically, is searchable, we can screenshot it, and we can forward it. And these changes, this changes like how we communicate sometimes. Sometimes if we know all of this could happen, then we may overthink our messages. We may hesitate to speak freely, and mistakes can say live forever. If we type the wrong thing, that can live forever. We forward it to several people. So when communication becomes more permanent, risk increases and users behave a little bit more cautiously, or they might avoid communicating at all. And then there's visibility, private versus public versus semi-public. In digital spaces, it's not always clear who can see the message, or who might see it later, whether it's private or public or semi-public. So poor visibility of audience will lead to high stake errors. Now, digital communication isn't just about sending messages, it's also about navigating tone. Like I said, it's navigating timing, permanence, and visibility all at the same time. And the interface plays a role in all of this. Now, the tools, again, they don't just carry our communication, but what do? They shape how safe, how stressful, or how effective it feels. Okay, now let's slow down and look at a few tools that you might already use. Not to judge them, but to understand like what they quietly encourage us to do. Now, Slack and Teams were designed to make communications feel faster and more visible. Now, they do this through design choices like message streams instead of inboxes, typing indicators, read receipts, visible present status, notifications that might appear immediately. All of these design elements send a message. Someone is here, someone might be waiting. So in tools like Teams or Slack, the design encourages quick replies. So you may notice pressure, to respond right away. Guilt if you don't. And the feeling that silence is noticeable. Even if no one says it, even if they don't say, please respond now, the interface suggests it. And that's a design message, not a written rule. Now, in chat platforms, communication is often visible to the different teams, to channels, and to multiple participants all at once. And this visibility changes behavior. So this will encourage like maybe shorter messages, less nuance, safer language, and less willingness to ask questions publicly. Now, the design affects what people say, not just how they say it. Now, because chat tools feel more casual and immediate, they can kind of blur boundaries between work and personal time. And so messages might arrive after hours. They might interrupt your focus, and they might feel a little harder to ignore than email. Again, no one had to intend this. The design made it feel normal. Now let's look at another everyday contrast. Say you may text a friend using emojis, abbreviations, informal tone, delayed responses without explanations. My children do this all the time. I would send them a text message and they might not respond to it for hours. But when you message a supervisor, okay, using that same tool, everything changes, right? Design plus context equals interpretation. The interface didn't change, okay, but the meaning did. Suddenly, timing matters more, okay? Emojis feel a little bit more risky to include. Abbreviations feel unprofessional, and tone is carefully considered. Sometimes you might send a message, like say to your a professional supervisor, even your professor, and you might think to yourself, I had to rewrite that message 3 times because you have to make sure that the tone was correct. That's HCI in action. Now, why does this happen? That's because digital tools don't clearly communicate social rules. So again, users have to infer them. They have to fill in the gaps. And so when expectations aren't clear, sometimes what happens? People start to overthink. People hesitate. And people feel anxious about saying the wrong thing. This kind of interface, again, it leaves interpretation up to the user. And sometimes we have problems with that. Video calls are another great example of how design shapes interaction. Now, video makes us feel like people are there with you. You can see their faces, you can hear their tone, you can watch reactions. And so what this does is it increases connection, it increases accountability and also engagement, but it comes with a cost. Okay, video calls demand constant attention, which gives us maybe video fatigue. Okay, you're constantly watching faces. You're constantly monitoring your own appearance. You're trying to interpret limited body language. And basically, you're staying on the entire time. And this cognitive load can be exhausting. Also, silence can feel differently. In a physical room, silence feels normal, okay? But in a video call, silence can feel awkward. People kind of rush to fill it. And then cameras and microphones, basically, they kind of amplify the pause. Now, the interface removes many also natural cues. So again, that silence is going to feel heavier. And that's not a personality issue. Again, that's a design effect. Now, none of these tools that we talked about tell us how to behave explicitly. However, through their design, they slightly shape our expectations, our comfort level, and even our stress level. And that's why HCI focuses so much on communication because, again, when design sends the wrong message, People don't fail, systems do. We just talked about how tools like chat platforms, text messaging, and video calls quietly shape how we behave, often pushing us toward more casual behavior, even in a professional setting. Now, I'd like to share with you a brief real world example where these design signals break down in a very visible way. Now, it might make you laugh at first, but I want you to watch it carefully through an HCI lens. Now, as you watch this, I want you to ignore the instinct to judge the person. Okay, instead, think about the environment, the interface, and the cues the technology is or isn't providing about what's appropriate. And then I want you to ask yourself, what expectation does this setting feel like it has? What cues are missing? And how does the technology contribute to what's happened here?
Mr. Garrison, state your name for the record, please.
DNS Garrison.
DNS, turn your camera on, please.
Yes.
All right, Mr. Garrett, oh no, come on, man. I'm out. You don't have a shirt on. I'm putting you out.
Give me 1 second. Give me 1 second.
No, I'm not giving you a second.
Ridiculous.
Okay, so yes, that was uncomfortable, but here's the important question for this course. How did this happen? Now, it's easy to say that the person should have known better, but HCI tells us a different or ask a different question. Okay, what does the design of the system communicate about expectations? Now, in a physical courtroom, the environment communicates professionalism immediately. Where to sit, how to dress, when to speak. The room itself sends messages. Now, in a video courtroom setting, many of these cues disappear. Now, later in HCI, the interface looks like a casual video call. The defendant is likely at home, and there's no strong visual cues saying this is a formal, high-stakes environment. So the design sends the wrong message. So when a system looks casual, people behave casually, even in a situation that's serious. Now, I want you to take a few minutes to think about how the system, how could the system have communicated expectations a little bit more clearly? Maybe, the system could have shown a message reminding users that this is a formal court proceeding. Maybe there could have been a waiting screen that showed courtroom rules or expectations. There could have been a warning before joining that explained like how to dress or how to behave. Or maybe even the interface itself could have looked a little bit more official, instead of looking like a normal video call. These are all examples of design communicating expectations, not relying on the users to guess. So remember, HCI isn't about fixing people, it's about designing systems that communicate expectations clearly, especially when the stakes are high. Now I want to do a little activity with you to help you see the unintended design messages and tools that you might use. So we've been talking about the idea that design sends messages, even when designers don't mean to. So I want you to practice spotting these messages in tools that you already use every day. I want you to think about a time when a digital tool made you feel something. Maybe it made you feel rushed or stressed or confused or pressured or unsure, even though no one explicitly told you, say, to feel that particular way. Now I want you to take out a piece of paper and I want you to answer these questions. What did the design suggest you do? What message did the interface send? What expectation did it create? Now, there's no wrong or right answer here. Now, I'm going to give you an example to illustrate what I mean. So, when my phone lights up or vibrates or, say, slides a notification banner across my screen, the design is telling me something. The system is saying, hey, pay attention, something just happened, you should look at it now. And that message changes my behavior. I'll glance at my phone even if I hadn't planned to. So even if it turns out to be, say, something minor or insignificant, the design has already created that urgency with me. So have you experienced something similar to that? Even if it's been, say, a different tool? This is what I mean when I say that design communicates, even when no one is speaking. Now, from an HCI perspective, interfaces don't just support communication. Again, they shape the norms. The design is going to influence professionalism. It influences participation, comfort speaking up, clarity of even meaning. Now, this brings us to Microsoft Teams, which we're going to be using throughout this course. The goal in this course is not just to use Teams successfully. Most courses treat platforms like Teams as like a delivery system or a requirement or something to figure out and to move on. However, in this course, the platform itself is going to be an intricate part of what we study. Now, you're not just using Teams, you're observing how you use it. That means as you move through the course, I want you to notice things like navigation. Where do you instinctively click first? What takes longer than you expect to find? I want you to look at feedback. Does the system clearly tell you when something worked, or do you have to guess? I want you to think about the confusion points that you experience. Where did you pause and think, wait, where is that? Okay. I want you to think about those moments of hesitation, when you stop before clicking because you're unsure of the results. And these moments are going to be incredibly important in HCI. Now, in most classes, hesitation, confusion feels like failure, but in HCI, hesitation is information for us. Confusion is going to be insight, and frustration is evidence. So if a system makes you stop and think too much, it's telling us something about the design. Okay. Learning a new system is one of the most authentic HCI experiences that you can have. Now, why is that? Because you're experiencing the system the way real users do, without insider knowledge. So as you learn Teams, you may notice assumptions that designers made about users, what they think you already know or what they think is obvious. You may notice workflows that feel natural, okay, steps that match how you expect things to work. You may notice workflows that kind of feel awkward, okay, maybe there's some extra clicks, uncertain labels, features that feed out of place, they feel out of place. And then features that help us to communicate, like maybe some clear threads or easy feedback or logical organization. And then also you may notice features that hinder communication, like too many notifications, confusing channels, unclear visibility of messages. Now, as you feel confused while using Teams, that doesn't mean that you're bad at technology. It means the system is communicating something and maybe communicating it poorly. And that's exactly what HCI is interested in. So as you work in Teams for the first module, I want you to remind yourself, my experience is part of the course material. Okay, you're not just completing a task, you're gathering data. Now, I want to spend the last few minutes of this lecture discussing reflection, as it's going to be central to how you're going to assess in this course, or how you're going to be assessed in this course. There's no correct or incorrect experience with a digital tool. Okay, two people can have the same system, they can use the same system, they can complete the same task, and they can walk away feeling completely different. Okay, that doesn't mean that one of them is wrong. It means that they brought different expectations. They have different habits, different prior experiences, and HCI cares about all of that. Now, why reflection matters in HCI? In HCI, reflection is not an option. Okay, reflection is how we identify design patterns, how we look at usability issues, understand user experiences. When you ask yourself, why did this confuse me? Why did this interrupt my focus? Why did I hesitate here? You're doing HCI analysis, even if you don't know the terminology yet. Now, in HCI, reflection is analysis. Okay, so you're not just describing what happened, you're starting to understand why it happened. Now, one of the most important ideas in this course is your experience, again, is data. Remember that. That means your confusion matters, your frustration matters, your ease matters, your hesitation matters. You don't need to be an expert or use technical language or even fix the system. Okay, you need to be observant, thoughtful, and honest. Now, I'm not grading you on liking or disliking a system. I'm grading you on how well you can notice, explain, and reflect on your experience. Now, in the next module, we're going to start looking at how people learn unfamiliar interfaces. So we're going to explore like why some systems might feel a little bit more intuitive, why other systems will feel overwhelming, and how design can support learning or it can block it. And what you're going to do is you're going to start seeing patterns emerge. So the takeaways, or I should say closing thoughts, what I want you to think about is every time technology frustrates you, it's telling you something. Now, this course is going to teach you how to listen to those signals and how to understand what they reveal about the design, communication, and human behavior. Now, once you learn to see technology in this way, you don't just use systems anymore, you'll understand them. So for this week's assignment, you're going to get started with using Microsoft Teams. If you did not get your invite or it doesn't show up in your Teams as far as the course, or you didn't get the link, then please reach out to me and let me know. So you can access Teams either by installing Teams application locally on your computer, or you can use it through the web browser by signing on through like the Microsoft apps through your JJC account. Now you're going to find the course team, and once you find that, again, I provided a link to it if you got the invite, but once you find it, then you're going to see like multiple channels that are going to be used for different class activities. Okay, there'll be like something that says introduction, QA, secret word, so on and so forth. Now each channel is going to have a specific purpose, and the instructions for when and how to use each one of these channels is going to be provided in your weekly modules. So take a look at this, the module 1, and you'll see instructions for that. Now remember, you're responsible for submitting working links to either to both your initial posts and then your reply. Now, if you are taking this as an independent study, there may not be something to reply to. But if there is, then I'd like for you to go ahead and reply if there is another post in there besides your own. I don't want you to link to the channel, okay? I need you to link to the specific message, and I do have information in the course room about that. So like I said, for this week, you're going to basically do an introduction, okay? You're going to post a message with your name, maybe your, if your name is different, I guess, than the display name, your pronouns if you want to, and then how does digital communication specifically impact your life? And again, some possible topics could include, and you don't have to do these, you can actually just have your own, but like maybe what platforms do you use the most or the least and why? Maybe even you might want to post a story about a funny communication that you experienced online, or how, maybe answer the question, how have digital communication platforms affected your professional experience? Okay. And so again, that's going to be your initial post. And if, even though this is an independent study, if there are other posts in there, there may be other students that are taking this as an independent study. And so you may see another post in there. So if you do, then go ahead and post a friendly reply to at least one other person, and maybe answer questions like, how does their experience compare to yours, or did you find anything that they shared particularly interesting? And then make sure that you paste the link to your post and your reply, if you were able to do a reply, in the Canvas text entry section. Okay, so that's it for this week. Or for this module, I should say. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Other than that, have a good week.